get bailed out, they're done. They'll be bankrupt. I believe they've sold 2 tranches now of $1.5 billion each. So they raised $3 billion in a week. The last one was done at 4.25%. I can do a mortgage. You can do a mortgage at under 4.25%. Those are junk rates. That shows you they're not a good credit, and the market believes them not to be a good credit. Their CDS is spiking, and of course, if you look at the existing bond prices, those have been collapsing. Deutsche Bank is not going to survive unless there's some type of a bailout, and this is a problem because Deutsche Bank cannot be bailed out without the rest of the European banks stepping up and saying, hey, we want to bail out. Mm-hmm. So it's a big problem for the EU.
Why do you think the Department of Justice placed the fine on Deutsche Bank right now of $14 billion going all the way back to 2008? I mean, does it make any sense to do this at this point? And it's not the only bank that did mortgage security fraud.
But first off, the $14 billion non-coincidentally equals the $14 billion that the EU says that Apple owes. So it's the exact same number, and I see no coincidence there at all. I mean, it's tit for tat. I would just say that it's economic war is what this is, and we're obviously going to talk about war later on.
Yes,
this is part of it.
So you think they did this on purpose?
Absolutely.
I mean, they know Deutsche Bank is insolvent. They know they can't handle something like this.
The timing of it, the size of the equal 14 billion. I mean, no, it's not a coincidence. This is done on purpose. It's economic war.
As we move forward here, we see the gold market. Last week, the precious metal market it was suppressed quite a bit. When you look at this, what do you think happened during this period?
Well, I think a whole bunch of paper contracts were sold. We know a bunch was sold on the COMEX. Andrew Maguire reported that all kinds of paper, I think he said 1,000 tons. That's 40% of global production was sold during the week. It was done with paper. And frankly, I don't care. I mean, it does not matter whether gold's 1,200, 1,500, 1,000. It makes no difference because either you're going to own it or you're not going to own it on the other side of what's coming. And what's coming looks like it's right here and right now.
Yeah, every time I see them suppress gold like this and it dropped quite a bit, I always feel there's an event that follows it.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and it looks like we are definitely heading in that direction.
And until today, in the last couple of days, we've had zero volatility for 90 days or more in global markets. And I mentioned this the other day that the reason that there's no volatility is that volatility creates margin calls. And the system right now is very illiquid. There's very little free cash. In other words, any margin calls that are issued, the money's not there to meet it. So in order to prevent margin calls, they had locked down the markets. Now we'll see what happens with the current news. I suspect volatility is going to absolutely explode.
You know, the last couple of times you were on the spotlight, you talked about the credit bubble. I see since 2008, during the height of the Great Recession, the credit bubble was around 1.59 trillion commercial and industrial loans. Today, August, we're past that. We're at 2.058 trillion. I mean, when this system collapses, I mean, it's looking like it's going to be a lot worse than 2008.
Well, I mean, 2008, had they allowed it to happen, we would be in the process now of picking up the pieces, cleaning up, and maybe even growing. If you look at total global debt, the IMF just came out saying that there's I think the word they used was nervous. There's $152 trillion of debt globally. That's 225% of global GDP. The world is a banana republic. The world is broke. I mean, it's completely mathematically over. There's no way the debt can be paid back. But please understand that 152 trillion that is debt is also what the other party considers an asset. So when the debt doesn't get paid and the debt defaults, well, that 152 trillion, where does that go? Maybe to 15 trillion? I don't know. I don't know how far it'll be marked down. But the asset side of the global balance sheet is going to be decimated.
So what does the central banks do right now? The Bank of Japan, ECB, the Fed, the IMF. What do they all do right now with all of this debt? Where can they go?
They have nowhere to go. The only possible thing they can do is just print, and that will destroy the underlying currencies themselves. The answer, unfortunately, is war, and that's what's happening right now. We are the strike of a match away from global war.
So, I mean, you mentioned war. We might as well start talking about war, what's happening here. We see out in Syria, Russia, the Syrian forces, they pretty much have wiped out the Islamic State, or pushed not just the Islamic State, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, just the terrorist group. Really, they decimated them. The United States and the terrorist groups, they're in a losing position right now. What is the United States government going to do?
Do you realize what you just said? You just said the terrorist groups and the United States.
Yes. Oh, no, I think it's all one and the same.
I agree, but I just want to point out that is basically the case.
So what do they do? I mean, they don't want to have talks anymore. They don't want to talk ceasefire. What are their options? What are their options right now?
I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think the U.S. really wants options. I believe that the U.S. wants war. And I said this probably a year ago or more, that the final chapter or the final act would be a war to cover the misdeeds, to cover the fraud. The only way that the Federal Reserve can say our policies were working. They would have worked if it was not for the war, if it wasn't for the table being kicked over. And that's what we're in the process of doing right now, is kicking the table over.
So what signs do you see that we're approaching war? I mean, when you're looking at everything around the world, what do you see that tells you, oh, yes, we're heading towards war?
Well, Dave, just this morning, I just pulled up a short list. Well, obviously, let me give you the answer, and then we'll talk about that. The answer is truth is starting to come out.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the U.S. wants war, because the truth is starting to come out. We're getting these WikiLeaks drops day after day after day. Just this morning, the Philippines, Duterte, is ordering the U.S. out of the Philippines after 60 years. The Royal Air Force has told their pilots to shoot down Russian fighters over Syria. And oddly enough, even I talked to someone this morning about it, and they're like, CBS, really? CBS apparently has come out with a list of people that died that were close to the Clintons. Call it a kill list, whatever you want to call it. And apparently, and my guess is these emails that are coming out from WikiLeaks are probably the entire 33,000 wiped emails. I even read this morning where the term in one of the emails that was used was wet water. And if you look that up, that's code for assassination. And then 10 days after that email was out, Justice Scalia was dead. So it just, the answer is truth. The truth is starting to come out. One of the emails said that Hillary hates everyday Americans. It's just more and more truth that comes out. The populace globally is on the verge of exploding. And the way to cover these tracks and make the emails unimportant, start a war, it's a nuclear war, and that's all she wrote.
So, I mean, we're heading towards this perfect storm. We have the collapsing economy, huge amount of debt around the world. The central bankers, they're out of ammunition. we have the elections coming up, and the entire Middle East is completely falling apart, not going in the way that the U.S. wants it to go. Do you think, while all this is going on, do you really think that they're going to allow the elections to happen?
No, I've said, I've been on the record since before the beginning of this year that I suspected early this year, I said there was a chance. I didn't know what the chance was. And then I upped it to 50% and upped it again to probably 70% chance that we're not going to have an election. It's pretty clear if you look at the online polls that have come out that are hugely in favor of Trump. If you look at the rallies, Trump's getting 10, 20, 30,000 people to rallies. Hillary's getting 3, 4, 500 people to rallies. It's pretty clear that Trump is way ahead, and they cannot allow Trump to become president because, like he said the other night, and you had to know he was thinking this anyway, he's going to do a clean sweep. I mean, he came right out and he said, I will tell my attorney general to appoint a special prosecutor, and you're going to go to jail. And it's not just Hillary. This is the Bushes. This is Republican, Democrat. It doesn't matter. This is the power structure out of Washington. They're dirty. They've committed fraud. They've stolen. They've killed. They've murdered. They've done all kinds of stuff over the last however many years. And the truth cannot be allowed to come out. So they really, as we get closer and closer to the election, they've got to either do something to cancel the election or steal the election. And I don't think it's stealable at this point. I think the numbers are too overwhelming.
Yeah, so do I. I don't even think that the percentage would allow them to say, okay, oh, look,
right.
Hillary Clinton won this.
Right.
And what's very interesting is during the debates, and it's not just Hillary who is saying this, they keep bringing up Russia cyber attacking the election system.
Right.
I don't know if you heard this.
Yeah, of course.
But
what they're getting at is, I mean, if there is an election and Trump wins, they'll say, oh, well, it didn't count because Russia threw the election. That's what they're trying to warm people up to.
And with a cyber attack, you know what's funny about cyber attacks? You really don't have to prove anything. All the
right.
corporate media has to do is come out and say, oh, yes, there was one.
Yeah, of course.
So
right.
Even with all of this, going forward, let's say the elections don't happen. What happens next?
Your guess is probably as good as mine. Can Obama stay past the term? I don't know. I don't know how it will work. I really don't. I'm pretty sure martial law will be in effect because you're going to have a lot of really pissed off Americans.
I agree with that. I think martial law will be in effect. And if I remember correctly, I think NATO and the United States, didn't they pass a resolution that any cyber attack is an act of war?
Right.
So at this point, I could see where this whole thing is headed. They're headed towards an area where they can bring war, they can stop the elections, and declare martial law all at once.
Right. If they can steal the election, Hillary wins and they get their war. If Trump were to win, they say that there was a cyber attack and there's your war. Or we have war before the elections. But it's clear, it's coming. I mean, just look at everything that's been lined up. U.S. has put missiles in Poland and Romania right on the Russian border. The Russians have brought in their S-300, S-400s into Syria. And I can't remember the exact quote, but a high official from Russia came out and said, if the U.S. wants war, they're going to have war everywhere. That means on many fronts. And we're a weakened military.
Yes.
I think it's more important to the elites to cover their tracks than to care about humanity. It's all about covering the dirty deeds.
Now, many people think that if we have war, that, you know, the economies around the world, they're going to just do fine during this period.
No, that's ridiculous. I mean, you're looking at a financial system that will be in total ruin. Everyone who owes anything isn't going to pay, and everybody who believes they own something, that will be their assets will be worthless. Like we just talked about, that 152 trillion worth of debt. For everyone who owes, there's somebody who owns. So if the debtors aren't paying, then the creditors aren't getting paid, and their asset shrinks or outright goes away. And I mean, we're talking about the financial aspect of it. Let's talk about the humanity aspect of it. You're talking about, hundreds of millions of people probably killed because we are not going to have it's not going to look like Vietnam. It's not going to look like any wars we've had in the past. This is going to be an exchange of nuclear weapons. And if you survive, you're going to be dying a slow death, basically, in a world where your life is completely unrecognizable and up to this point unimaginable.
I mean, you're saying that this war, as we know, I mean, we're much more advanced today with weaponry. During World War II, the war wasn't really fought on American soil.
Right.
This time,
we've never had since the Civil War, since the Revolutionary War, because the Civil War was internal. What was it, the War of 1812 or whatever? We've never had a war on our soil, ever. And that's going to happen this time.
So we're not going to be separate and apart.
No.
Like we were in World War II, where, everything's fine here in America. It's happening someplace else. And we just read about it or hear about it.
Everything wasn't fine during World War II in America because there was rationing. You had the entire nation geared up to manufacture weaponry. This time around, bombs will be dropping here. So for the first time, literally ever, the U.S. is going to find out what it's like to go to war and have that war partially on our own turf.
During the last war, we had manufacturing here in the United States.
Right.
Today,
it's gone.
We really don't.
Right, it's gone. The manufacturing is gone. Most of the machines that we had have been sold and have been shipped overseas. So we don't even have a manufacturing base.
What does the United States do now about creating weaponry and things like that? It's going to be a lot tougher.
Well, yeah, it's virtually impossible. I don't see this as being a very long war. We have, I think, 2 or 3 days of nukes being lobbed back and forth, maybe one at a time. Hopefully that's all it is. And then cooler heads prevail and say, let's stop this. Otherwise, it's over. Otherwise, you're looking at Armageddon. You're looking at the end.
So I truly do believe that. I think it's going to start out as a conventional war. And I think it will, when the United States has no other options left and they're losing, I think it will go nuclear.
Right.
But during that period, during the war period of a conventional war, since the economy's collapsing and we've never seen the amount of debt that we have and no one's paying anything back, what happens with the deliveries to stores? What happens to people getting supplies? What happens to oil hitting, our shores, and we have oil to power our cars and things like that? What happens with all of that?
Even if we don't have war, from a financial standpoint, when credit stops, distribution stops. So going to your store to get a loaf of bread that's a thing of the past for a while.
Doesn't war make this much more difficult to get the supplies, to get the oil, to get the manufacturing products from different countries? Won't that?
Right. Trade with other countries will stop. So that's 500, 600 billion worth of goods that won't be coming in. So there won't be any iPhones. There won't be any Korean, Japanese cars, German cars, whatever. That's going to stop. But I'm talking about from a you wake up in the morning standpoint and you're hungry, stores aren't going to be open. There's no point in stores being open because they won't have any goods. Distribution is going to break down. In other words, the trucking industry, the rail industry, they're not going to work because credit will have stopped and everything runs on credit. I mean, think about the loaf of bread. That doesn't just appear in a Walmart or your local grocery store. You're talking about a farmer that's got to grow the wheat, and he's got to plant it, he's got to harvest it, he's got to ship it to the silo, then the silo's got to ship it to a intermediary to turn it into bread, and then it's got to get on a truck and it's got to go from wherever the bread is actually made to the shelf. And all of those, every single step uses credit. So that loaf of bread is not going to be made. It's not going to exist.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the glut of oil that we're seeing right now, do you think the United States told Saudi Arabia to pump as much as you possibly can to have the oil supplies ready for war?
I think the thought process back in 2013-14 was they were going to try to pull a Ronald Reagan from the 80s. The way we took down Russia by dropping oil from $30 a barrel to $10 a barrel, we bankrupted them. This time around, it couldn't be done, but we apparently the people pulling the strings thought it could be done, and I think they miscalculated.
They just kept the oil prices low and continually tried.
One other thing you're mentioning the Saudis. Don't forget that the Congress just overrode Obama's veto, which I can't believe he vetoed it because it was unanimous in both houses, the Saudi bill, where citizens of people that were survivors of 9/11, the families of 9/11 victims, are going to be allowed to, and the first lawsuit's already out there, are going to be allowed to sue Saudi Arabia. Now, let's go. That's a problem because the Saudis, that really obviously angered the Saudis, and they're going to be pulling assets from the U.S. But let's go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, truth. What's going to come out during discovery process if any of these lawsuits go forward? What's going to come out is what actually happened, or what actually didn't happen, and what didn't happen was the official story. I mean, I don't know the real story. I suspect I have a great idea of what the real story is, but I know the official story is complete bull. It could not have happened that way. That's going to come out. Again, truth. And that's what this is all about. It's all about, we're in this compressed time period now where truth bomb after truth bomb after truth bomb is being dropped day after day after day.
This does give the Saudi government the ability to sell assets here in the United States.
Right.
That's one way they can retaliate against these lawsuits, to put pressure on the United States to try to stop the lawsuits.
Yeah, but forget about retaliate. That way they get their money out from the U.S. where it can't be frozen. They can get their hands on the money. You sell stocks, you sell real estate, you sell treasuries. It's going to hurt the U.S. It's going to depress the markets that they're selling. It'll also depress the dollar when they end up selling these assets for dollars. They're not going to sit on dollars. They're going to turn around and put them into yuan, or they're going to turn around and put it into gold or whatever. So they'll be selling dollars. It's a form of revenge or punishment or whatever you want on the part of the Saudis, but in reality, it's just common economic sense. Get your assets out of the U.S. so they can't freeze them. And we've done it before. Look how long we froze the Iranian monies until Obama gave it all back to them a couple months back.
I was thinking about, Jess, that doesn't this open up a Pandora's box where other countries can say, well, wait a minute, if the U.S. can sue Saudi Arabia for doing something on U.S. soil, can't Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Ukraine, all these other countries sue the United States for what we did over there?
Right, I would think so. And again, you're opening discovery, the discovery process in law, and the truth is a really ugly thing today.
From everything that you've been looking at, what do you think the time frame is that we are going to be heading to war? Do you think it'll be next year? Do you think it'll be around elections? When do you think that all of this is going to start coming together? I have no idea. I mean, nobody has any idea. You could have two pilots jockeying with each other, and they clip wings, and your war starts there. Who knows? Who knows what the match is going to be? All I know is we right now are in a far more dangerous position than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, to be honest with you, Dave, by the time you edit this tape and get it out to the public, it's possible that it could have already started. I have no idea. All I know is it's the tensions have never been this elevated. And you have one side that wants for a reason to start the war.
and that's to kick the table over and cover the tracks.
Bill, for my last question, for those who are listening right now, what would you tell them to do to prepare for all of this? I mean, what should people be doing right now?
Well, it's obviously pretty late in the sequence, but you need to try to be as self-sufficient as possible. I mean, all along I've told people from a financial standpoint, own gold and silver, doesn't matter what price you own it at, because when the system goes down and then comes up at a later date, if this, we get a functioning system later, there's wealth. So you can start in a new system with wealth, but you got to get to the other side. And getting to the other side means you got to eat. You need water, and you need food. You need, could you live without electricity? I mean, just think about, what would it be like to live like they did in the 1850s? No electricity, no running water, the very, very basics.
Bill, thank you for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can go to www.jsmineset, M-I-N-E, set. My writings are found there on the subscriber side of the site.
Okay, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Sorry to be so bleak, but it's an ugly truth.
You're just telling the truth, and I mean, this is what's happening right now. I mean, there's nothing else that you can really say, but we're heading down a path where things are just deteriorating very, very quickly. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless.
You too.